A Hot Day in Summer, Part 3. Written and read for you by SirTenTales.
All right, finish up. We're not staying here all night,
Justin yelled over the sound of the circle saws and drills. His voice was so big and booming that Emmet could easily hear him over the noise of the power tools and the Green Day playing in his earbuds. Emmet wondered why Justin never bothered auditioning for a show. He could easily be heard through the theater without a microphone. Everyone started wrapping up their projects, sweeping up sawdust, cleaning paintbrushes, and capping glue tubes. It was the magical time of the night when work was done and they could finally relax and have a late-night dinner or early morning breakfast. Oh, sure, everyone ate something before, but most likely that was a power bar and a soda between classes and shop. Now was the time to actually sit and eat, like a human.
Thank the gods. I have been dying for a stack of pancakes,
Ruby said, exasperated, as she hammered the tops back on the open paint cans. Me too, Moby agreed, as they pulled battery packs from power drills and set them in their charging stand. I hadn't eaten anything since... Moby paused and looked at the ceiling with a pensive look. What day is it?
You keep making that joke, and I'll follow you around with a plate of spaghetti,
Clyde chided. Moby laughed. I would love that. Hey, can you follow me around with cake too?
Don't push it,
Clyde said flatly. You didn't deny it, Moby replied in a sing-song teasing tone. Everyone was far into their cleanup routine and getting their jackets and backpacks, except Cherry. She was still slowly adding a flower to the bottom of the nearly completed backdrop. Come on, Cher, let's get food, Ruby called over her shoulder as she slung her backpack on. I'm coming, just finishing this up, she said to Ruby, her usual bright smile on her face. Okay, I'll order your disco fries at the diner. Emmet, don't let her stay long, Ruby said as she walked to the door with everyone else. Emmet had just closed the last drawer when Cherry straightened up and dunked her paintbrush in the water pail next to her.
Still up for riding together?
Emmet asked as Cherry poured the water in the shop sink and washed her paintbrush. Absolutely, Cherry replied quite loudly. I'm all done. Let's go. I need fries. Her paintbrush drying by the sink, she turned to Emmet. Again, Emmet saw a pensive look on Cherry's face, but it only lasted for a second. Then she turned and walked to the door. They always get so far ahead of us. You'd think they teleported to the diner. Emmet followed Cherry, grabbing his backpack by the door.
Maybe we're just slow,
he said, trying to lighten Cherry's mood. He wasn't sure if he needed to lighten her mood, but he still couldn't place that look on her face. Maybe, Cherry said with a laugh. They walked out of the theater shop into the parking deck in silence. Since Cherry and Emmet were both commuters and lived with their parents, they both had cars. Everyone else in the theater build crew grabbed the shuttle bus since they lived on campus. The walk to the car was long and quiet. Cherry didn't say much. Neither did Emmet. This wasn't good, Emmet thought. Usually they have tons to talk about, but Cherry has been so quiet. Maybe something is really bothering her.
Hey, Cherry,
Emmet said cautiously. Cherry seemed to shake herself out of her thoughts. Yeah? Sorry, I think I zoned out, she said.
Are you...
Emmet was about to ask if she was okay, but realized he knew the answer she would give him would be, yes, I'm fine. So instead, Emmet asked,
Finished with that game I lent you?
Cherry stopped in her tracks and turned to Emmet with both hands on her head, a horrified look on her face. Oh my God! I completely forgot to tell you about the Easter egg I found, she exclaimed.
Wait, what?
Emmet exclaimed in return, in both surprise at this new information and relieved to hear Cherry's cheerful voice again. For the rest of the walk, there was an exciting back and forth about the Easter egg, other games in the series, and everything and anything they could think of. Like they haven't talked in years. Oh, and remember you said you were going to prep me for that LARP event, Cherry exclaimed, walking backwards toward the parking deck so she could talk to him face to face. Emmet remembered. He couldn't forget. One day, he let slip that he dressed in costume and pretended to be a knight or barbarian who fights in wars on the weekends. He didn't know how this happened. He just blurted it out, and before he knew it, he was in his own world, explaining the ins and outs of the event and his character and the story.
Oh, shit,
he exclaimed. He finally caught himself in a spew of LARP information.
Just forget everything I said.
He tried to backtrack. He didn't need Cherry thinking he was a weirdo, or at least more of a weirdo than he normally was. But then, Cherry's eyes gleamed, and a veritable squeal escaped her lips. She asked, nay, demanded, he tell her more. I never knew this was a thing. You knew this was a thing and you never told me? She nearly yelled.
I didn't think it was that interesting.
Not that interesting? Are you mad? This is the coolest thing I've ever heard. Oh, is there magic? Oh, how about wizards?
At some point I'd like to create a wizard character and play as him,
Emmet said. He was shocked at her reaction. She actually wanted to know about this stuff? Really? This sounds so cool. Oh, how cool would it be to have a dragon puppet on your shoulder? She said, bouncing on her toes. Emmet couldn't believe it. Here he was, explaining every last detail he could of something he normally keeps to himself, to the girl who's always on his mind. They had moved on to LARP swords by the time they made it to Emmet's Jeep. They closed the doors and buckled in. And there was that look on Cherry's face again. Pensive. Emmet couldn't shake the feeling that something was really bothering Cherry. Maybe she wasn't willing to talk about it over text or in the loud shop with everyone else there. But in the safety of his Jeep, she might say something different.
Hey, answer me honestly,
Emmet began, treading lightly.
When we met up in front of the library, you seemed upset about something. Is anything wrong?
Cherry glanced at Emmet before being engrossed in smoothing a wrinkle in the yellow ribbon at her waist. Miraculously, the pretty dress she was wearing all through shop time was not covered in paint, only speckled in it. Yeah, everything is fine, really. Her voice betrayed no sadness or anxiousness, but her hands didn't stop moving. Actually, Emmet, she turned to him, almost full body in her seat to look at him. Emmet's heart thumped in his throat. She looked so sincere and rigid, like she wanted to tell him something very important. But she didn't say anything else. They didn't move for a full minute. They only looked at each other. Then Cherry's shoulder slumped, and she sighed, looking down slightly. She shook her head and grinned, and looked back up at him. I have this presentation to do for class, and I haven't wrapped my head around it yet, so I was wondering if you could listen to it before I have to present it, she said.
Sure, no problem,
Emmet said, offering a small, reassuring smile. Cool, thanks. She let out a small chuckle and turned around in her seat. Her hands moved to one of her braids, wrapping and unwrapping it around her finger. Anyway, back to the swords. What are they made of so that you can actually fight with people and not hurt them?
People can still get hurt if they aren't careful, but it's less of a risk of cutting off a limb at least,
Emmet answered. This wasn't it. This definitely wasn't it. It was something else. Something more important than presentation anxiety. He couldn't figure it out. But Cherry wouldn't tell him, even though she seemed like she wanted to. Nevertheless, they kept on their conversation of swords and knives and buffers. Emmet decided whenever she wanted to talk about whatever it was, he was ready to listen. When they finally got to the diner, Emmet had explained every detail of how to make the fantasy semi-safe swords. So we are definitely making some then. Cherry beamed, nearly bouncing in her seat. Emmet loved how it didn't take much to make Cherry excited about something. They finally walked into the diner. Everyone was already there and had ordered their food. I ordered your usual disco fries, Cherry, and your Reuben, Emmet, Ruby announced as Emmett and Cherry walked into the near-empty diner. One of the greatest things in the world is going to a 24-hour diner with your closest friends at 1 a.m., talking, laughing, and planning your next big projects.
Okay, so we've got maybe 80% of the set done. If we really push next week, we can be done before tech, and then everyone can marvel at our time management skills,
Justin proclaimed, half a burger in his hand.
Even though we've been pulling all-nighters 3 times a week? That's what you call time management?
Clyde said flatly. Everyone laughed at this. The absurdity of calling what they did time management was not lost on them. Justin still grinned and said over the laughter,
"We're not dead, are we?"
This just made everyone laugh harder. Yes, they were not dead in the literal sense, just dead tired. So somehow, to them, this was hilarious. Okay, real talk. I'm sure there was a paper due in stagecraft class on Tuesday. Did anyone finish it? Ruby asked between bites of pancake. No, everyone said in unison. More laughter. Why exactly doesn't building an entire set count as the paper? Moby mused, a bite of spaghetti halfway to their mouth as they thought out loud, not bothering to take the bite. Clyde noticed this. He gently raised Moby's hand to finish the pathway to their mouth. Moby, still in their own thoughts, took the bite of spaghetti and chewed slowly. Emmett loved this part of the night, or morning, where he could just be with his friends in a safe little haven that cannot be touched by the outside world. As always, he split his Reuben with Cherry and they both shared her disco fries. If Emmet could, he would make moments like this last forever. But sadly, they had to come to an end sometime. Cherry's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and looked at the screen. A grimace crossed her face. I'll be right back. I gotta take this, she said as she stood from the table. Don't be too long. Your fries will get cold, Ruby said with a joking smile. Thanks, Auntie. I'll be right back. She hurriedly jogged through the diner and out the front door. Emmet watched her go, a familiar anxiousness welling up in him. 15 minutes passed and Cherry hadn't come back. Emmet kept furtively looking at the door. He knew that look on Cherry's face when she got that phone call, so he had a sure hunch of who she was talking to. If you're so worried, go check on her, Ruby whispered to him. Emmet started and looked at her. Dude, you haven't touched your food since you walked out. Go check. I'm sure she needs the company. Emmet wondered how Ruby was so perceptive, or if he was being that obvious.
I'll go check on Cherry,
Emmet said as he rose from his seat and walked toward the diner entrance.
We'll take care of the bill. You guys should probably be heading home soon anyway.
Emmet knew this well, which is why he wasn't surprised when he saw Cherry pacing the sidewalk in near tears, with her phone pressed to her ear. He could hear shouting over the phone. Emmet took a few steps toward Cherry and waved a bit so she would know he was there. She stopped and looked at him and gave him a watery smile and turned back to pacing again. Yes, okay, I know, she said into the phone, voice shaking. Okay. I'm on my way now. Bye. Cherry ended the call and put the phone in her pocket. She buried her face in her hands and let out a frustrated sigh. Emmet knew who that was on the phone. He approached Cherry slowly and stood next to her.
Your mom,
he said matter-of-factly. Cherry nodded. This wasn't the first time Emmet witnessed Cherry shut down from a phone call. He remembered a night after a show. The stagehands and build crew decided to have a nightcap before closing up for the night. Obviously, since Emmett and Cherry had to drive, They could not drink, but they were happy to drink water and spend time with their friends. And that, my dear sir, is why corsets have a bad rap, Cherry said to Emmet over the drunken chatter in the theater's backstage.
So, you think corsets should become an everyday necessity then?
He asked, smiling to himself. He wasn't sure how they came onto this topic, but it seemed apt for them. No, not an everyday occurrence. Just once in a while when you want to feel extra fancy. And it shouldn't be just a woman's garment, either. Men should wear them too. And everyone in between. Literally everyone should wear a corset at least once, Cherry explained, her hands moving as fast as her words.
Really?
Emmet mused, taking a drink of water. You would look good in a corset, Emmet, Cherry said. Emmet nearly choked on his water. You okay? Cherry asked, rubbing Emmet's back as he coughed.
Fine,
he choked.
Wrong pipe. I don't think I would look good in a corset.
Think of the whole picture, silly. Gray pants, a white collared shirt with a strapped corset over that, and a frock coat to complete the look, Cherry explained, her eyebrows raised in question as if to say, I can absolutely make this happen.
So, we are going full-on Victorian.
Damn straight we are. If you're going to drink the milk, you might as well buy the whole cow.
What the hell kind of metaphor is that?
A good one, thank you very much. They both began to laugh hysterically at the absurdity of the conversation when Cherry felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She stopped laughing immediately and whipped her phone out. Emmet stopped too and saw the grimace on her face. It's my mom. Sorry, I gotta take this, Cherry said to Emmet.
Sure, no problem,
he replied as she stood and walked out the backstage door to the parking lot. Emmet wondered how often he'd seen that face on Cherry, or how often he made that face when he was on the phone with his own mother. A few minutes later, Cherry came back down the backstage, a bit more harried and sniffling. Hey, Emmet, I'm running home. Tell everyone bye for me, okay? Cherry said, grabbing her backpack and not looking at Emmet.
Hey, wait, Cherry, what's wrong?
Emmet stood trying to catch her eye. Nothing, just nothing. You know, moms. She tried to make her voice sound light, but it still shook.
Yeah, I get it,
Emmet said softly. Stepping closer to her, he bowed his head even closer.
You know I get it.
Cherry looked up finally, tears welling in her eyes. She smiled at him.
I'll be up late if you feel like talking,
he said, smiling back. Okay. Talk to you later, she said, backing away to the stage door.
Absolutely, Emmet replied.
Cherry turned to go, but not without one last look at Emmet before dashing out the door. Emmet knew back then, and even now, how much he understood Cherry, and how much Cherry understood him. Cherry had stopped pacing. She was taking deep breaths to calm herself down. She raised her head and sighed again. I'm sorry. Do you mind if you could drive me back to my car right now, please? Cherry said to Emmet. Her eyes had started tearing again.
Sure, no problem, he said quickly. Let's get our stuff and we can go.
Just as they got to the door, everyone was leaving the diner. Ruby and Moby gave Cherry and Emmet their backpacks and packed food. Wait, how much do we owe you? Cherry asked.
Don't worry about it, it's late. You guys can get it next time, Justin exclaimed.
The group exchanged goodbyes and Emmett and Cherry made their way to Emmett's Jeep. They got in the car in silence and drove back to the campus, the whole way as quiet as a tomb. Cherry was looking out the passenger window the whole time. Emmet wasn't sure what to say. When they made it back to the parking deck, Cherry quickly said her goodbye to Emmet and exited the car without another word. Crap. Emmet wished he could think of something to say. He knew what Cherry was feeling right now. He felt the same way a lot when he had to deal with his parents. He and Cherry had the same type of parents, the type who were just a little too overbearing. He figured he was going to hear an earful too when he got home, but he really didn't care then. What he cared about was making Cherry feel better. He knew from experience that to face a dragon, you needed a sword. Emmett ripped off his seatbelt and bolted from the car. He hurried after Cherry just as she got to her little sedan. "Cherry!" he called. She stopped and turned to look at him. Her eyes were puffy now, and she was winding her braid in her fingers. Still not sure of his plan, the only thing that came to Emmett's mind was,
"Hey, remember when we were talking about that puppet for my wizard character? Why don't we make it? Like now?"
Cherry perked up at this and smirked at him. Exactly what he was hoping she would do. This, he knew, was the start of the cogs and gears in Cherry's creative mind. "I do love that idea," Cherry said slowly. "But when the heck are we gonna use the thing? You're not currently running a wizard character."
"Does it matter?"
Emmett asked. His heart thumped hard. Long seconds passed as Cherry looked at Emmet. Then her bright smile spread across her face. No, it doesn't. Let's do it," she exclaimed. She did a small celebratory bunny hop at this. "This is going to look so sick! I can't wait!"
"Okay, we'll start tomorrow after classes end,"
Emmett said, smiling as well. "Sounds good to me." She turned to her car and opened the door. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said over her shoulder to him.
"Okay,"
he said in return. Cherry waved, got into her car, and roared the engine to life. She did a wide donut on the deck and cheerfully waved at Emmet again as she drove toward the exit. Emmet let his head fall back and breathed a sigh of relief to the night sky. He knew what Cherry was feeling before, and how much it helps to have someone on the other side to pull you out of that sticky, sinking sadness. Cherry did it for him all the time. He was glad he could do it for her, too. Only, puppets. What was he thinking? He had no idea how they were supposed to make puppets. Why didn't he say swords? That would have made more sense. Emmet smacked his hand to his forehead. No matter. He expected Cherry might be in the same boat as he was on this one, since they only talked about puppets once before. Still, Emmet smiled to himself as he walked back to his car. It really didn't matter if they didn't know what they were doing. At least they would be figuring it out together. And if there was any way Emmet could help Cherry, he happily would.